A man betrays his lifelong friend in business, but loses everything when karma strikes back. David and Michael had been inseparable since childhood. Growing up in the same small town, they shared everything: schoolbooks, meals, and dreams. Both were ambitious, and when the opportunity came to start a business together, they pooled their modest savings and launched a construction company. The venture flourished quickly, their hard work and trust forming the backbone of every deal. David, the visionary, brought in clients with his charisma and bold ideas, while Michael, meticulous and disciplined, ensured that every project ran smoothly. Their success became the talk of the town, and they vowed to remain partners for life. They often joked that their friendship was stronger than blood. But as their company expanded and profits skyrocketed, envy and greed began to creep into Michael's heart. He saw David's popularity with clients as a threat and resented the praise his partner often received. Though David still trusted him completely, Michael quietly started making plans that would test the very foundation of their lifelong bond. The stage was set for betrayal, and the first cracks in their brotherhood were about to appear. Temptation finally overpowered loyalty. Secretly, Michael began forging documents and siphoning money from the company accounts into his own. At first, the amounts were small, but his greed grew quickly. Soon, he orchestrated a scheme to push David out of the business entirely. By manipulating contracts and bribing a few dishonest board members, Michael staged a vote that transferred majority control into his hands. Shocked and devastated, David found himself betrayed by the one man he trusted most. His lifelong friend, the brother he never had turned against him. David fought legally, but the evidence was stacked against him. Michael had covered his tracks well. In just a few weeks, David went from co-founder of a thriving company to a man left with nothing but heartbreak and disbelief. The town buzzed with rumors, and though some sympathized with David, many believed Michael's lies. Alone and humiliated, David withdrew from the public eye, while Michael basked in the newfound power and wealth. But his victory was not as sweet as he imagined. He had won the company, yes, but in doing so, he had unleashed the wrath of karma, which was slowly making its way back to him. At first, Michael lived lavishly. He bought mansions, luxury cars, and flaunted his riches to anyone who would look. But he underestimated the burden of managing the business without David's vision. Projects began to fail, contracts fell apart, and trusted clients turned away after realizing Michael's incompetence. Without David's leadership and honesty, the company's reputation collapsed. Investors pulled out, employees resigned, and soon debts piled higher than the profits. Michael's greed had blinded him to the truth. The company's soul was never his, it was built on teamwork and trust. To make matters worse, his fraudulent activities eventually came to light. Tax authorities uncovered irregularities in the accounts, and lawsuits began flooding in. What was once a flourishing empire now crumbled before his very eyes. The board members who once supported him distanced themselves, leaving Michael alone to face the storm. His luxurious lifestyle vanished as quickly as it had begun. Piece by piece, everything he had stolen slipped away, until he had less than when he first started. For the first time in years, Michael felt the weight of guilt, but by then it was far too late. Michael lost everything: his wealth, his status, and the very company he had stolen. Stripped of friends and influence, he wandered the same streets where he once flaunted his riches. People who once envied him now mocked him, whispering about how greed had destroyed his life. Meanwhile, David, though broken at first, found peace in starting anew. With the support of a few loyal clients, he slowly rebuilt his career with integrity and resilience. His smaller projects began to flourish, not because of wealth or power, but because of the trust and respect he carried with him. Michael, on the other hand, was left to live with the consequences of his betrayal. Alone in a modest apartment, he often replayed his choices in his mind, realizing that his downfall wasn't caused by fate or bad luck, but by his own hands. The irony was cruel. In betraying his friend to gain everything, he ended up with nothing. Karma had struck with merciless precision. The once greedy business partner was now a cautionary tale, remembered not for his success, but for how greed and betrayal can destroy even the strongest of bonds. In the quiet of his small apartment, Michael found himself haunted by memories. Nights were the worst. Silence pressed against him like a heavy weight, and the laughter he once shared with David replayed in his mind like a cruel reminder. He thought about the early days, how they built the company from scratch, working late nights fueled by hope. Now those memories turned bitter. His betrayal had not only destroyed his business but had also severed the bond of trust with the only true friend he ever had. Shame gnawed at him, yet pride stopped him from reaching out. He wondered if David would ever forgive him, but he knew the answer deep down. Michael realized he had chased shadows, mistaking wealth for happiness. The emptiness of his life was unbearable, and no amount of money, had he kept it, could fill the void left by friendship lost. Solitude became his punishment, a prison of his own making. Each day felt longer than the last, and with every passing hour, Michael finally understood that betrayal doesn't just hurt others, it destroys the betrayer from within. While Michael wallowed in regret, David's life began to bloom again, though slowly and with difficulty. At first he doubted himself, scarred by the betrayal of someone he considered family. But David was not one to surrender. With patience he cultivated small but meaningful partnerships. He focused on quality rather than quantity, earning back the trust of clients who had once abandoned him. His resilience inspired others. Employees who had once worked for their old company returned, choosing loyalty over glamour. Unlike Michael, David found satisfaction not in material wealth but in seeing his projects transform lives. Schools, homes, and hospitals built with honesty. He became a mentor for young entrepreneurs, teaching them that integrity was the foundation of true success. Though scars remained, David's heart healed with each act of kindness and hard work. Slowly he realized that losing the company had been a blessing in disguise. It freed him from greed's shadow and allowed him to rediscover purpose. For David, renewal didn't come from revenge, but from rising above betrayal with grace. His life became proof that honesty, though tested, always finds a way to triumph. Fate has a strange way of weaving lives together. One rainy afternoon, years after their fallout, Michael and David crossed paths. Michael looked frail, his once proud shoulders slumped, his clothes worn and untidy. David, in contrast, carried himself with quiet dignity. The weight of struggle replaced by the strength of perseverance. For a moment time seemed to freeze. Michael's eyes filled with shame. Unable to meet David's steady gaze, he stammered an apology, his voice trembling. "I was wrong, David. I destroyed everything we built. I destroyed us." David stood silent, the old wound reopening with the force of memory. Yet instead of anger, he felt pity. "You didn't destroy me, Michael," David said calmly. "You destroyed yourself." The words pierced Michael deeper than any punishment ever could. He wept openly, the facade of arrogance crumbling entirely. Though David didn't offer forgiveness, he offered something Michael hadn't expected: compassion. Their meeting ended with silence, but in that silence Michael recognized the weight of his sins. David walked away with his head high, leaving Michael to wrestle with the truth. Redemption could only come from within. The story of David and Michael spread far beyond their town. People whispered about how greed had ruined one man and how resilience had uplifted another. Business leaders used their tale as a lesson in integrity, warning new entrepreneurs about the dangers of betrayal. David was invited to speak at conferences and workshops, where his words carried the authority of lived experience. He often said, "A business can survive losses, debts, and setbacks, but it cannot survive the loss of trust." His philosophy resonated with many. Meanwhile, Michael became a cautionary tale, his name tied to deceit and downfall. He never fully regained his standing, for reputations, once broken, are difficult to repair. Yet in his failures, others found wisdom. The reminder that no amount of short-term gain can outweigh the long-term cost of dishonor. Their story became more than just about two men. It became a universal truth about human choices. The world learned that success without integrity is merely an illusion, and when that illusion breaks, it leaves only emptiness behind. Years passed, and Michael aged into a quieter, humbler man. Time had stripped him of arrogance, leaving only regret and reflection. One day he began volunteering at community projects, offering free labor and advice, hoping to make amends in small ways. Though people never forgot his betrayal, they began to see his sincerity. He lived modestly, but for the first time in years he found a sense of peace. Redemption, he realized, wasn't about reclaiming wealth or status, it was about giving without expecting anything in return. David, from a distance, heard of Michael's transformation. Though he never fully trusted him again, he respected the effort. Their friendship could not be restored, but forgiveness at last became possible in David's heart. Michael died quietly, remembered not for his greed but for the lesson his life embodied. David continued his work, carrying forward their shared dream in a way that honored the good memories, not the betrayal. In the end, the story of the greedy business partner came full circle, not in riches, but in humility, forgiveness, and the timeless truth that character is the greatest wealth a man can possess. As David grew older, he often reflected on the trials that had shaped his journey. What had once been a devastating betrayal became a cornerstone of his philosophy. Trust is both fragile and priceless. He established a foundation to support young entrepreneurs, teaching them that ethics must never be sacrificed for profit. His lectures emphasized that money is fleeting, but trust endures through generations. Many of his protégés went on to build successful ventures, carrying David's lessons with them. His reputation as a man of integrity far outlived the scandal of Michael's betrayal. David's story became less about what he lost and more about what he built afterward, a legacy rooted in resilience and honesty. Even as his hair turned gray and his hands grew frail, his spirit remained unshaken. People sought not just his business advice, but his wisdom on life itself. And in that way, David found peace knowing that the betrayal which once nearly destroyed him had instead become the very thing that allowed him to build a lasting legacy. Michael, though humbled and forgotten by many, found purpose in living simply. He never again sought wealth or power, but instead dedicated his later years to repairing the damage he caused. Though he knew it could never fully be undone, he helped struggling workers, mentored small shopkeepers, and gave what little he had to causes greater than himself. To some, he became a strange figure, a man who had once been consumed by greed, now living as if trying to atone for every sin. Children in the neighborhood knew him as the kindly old man who gave advice freely and never asked for anything in return. Though he lived in obscurity, Michael carried a quiet dignity in his final years. He no longer sought redemption in the eyes of the world, but within his own conscience. The weight of his choices never left him, yet he found solace in small acts of goodness. His journey was no longer about business or wealth. It was about learning painfully and fully what it truly meant to live with humility. Years later, David's foundation brought together young entrepreneurs from across the country. At one such gathering, a group of students discovered Michael's story. Curious, they sought him out, expecting to find a bitter old man. Instead, they met someone transformed by regret and humility. Michael spoke candidly about his betrayal of David, never excusing himself, but instead offering his life as a warning. Do not chase wealth at the cost of friendship. It will leave you emptier than poverty ever could. His words, spoken with raw honesty, moved the young audience deeply. Some later recalled that Michael's cautionary tale had a greater impact than any polished lecture. When word reached David that Michael had been speaking to the younger generation, he smiled faintly. Though their friendship could never be mended, David recognized that Michael, in his own way, had found purpose in turning his mistakes into lessons. In that, perhaps, lay a form of redemption neither of them had foreseen. Time eventually claimed them both. David passed surrounded by family, friends, and protégés who had become his extended family. His funeral was filled with people whose lives he had touched, all speaking of his kindness, resilience, and unwavering integrity. Michael, older and frailer, attended quietly at the back. Few recognized him, but David's family welcomed him without malice. Standing at the grave, Michael whispered a final apology, though he knew David could no longer hear it. For the first time in decades, he felt the burden of guilt lift slightly, as if David's spirit had already forgiven him. Not long after, Michael too passed away. Alone, but at peace. His story might not have been celebrated, but it was remembered by those who had heard his warnings. Two men, once bound by friendship and torn by betrayal, ended their journeys in very different ways. One honored for his integrity, the other remembered as a lesson in the cost of greed. Long after their deaths, the story of David and Michael lived on. It was told in classrooms, in boardrooms, and even around dinner tables as a parable of trust, greed, and redemption. For some, David represented the triumph of resilience. For others, Michael embodied the dangers of unchecked ambition. Together, their lives formed a balance, two paths diverging from the same beginning. One built on integrity, the other on betrayal. The world remembered not only what they did, but what their story meant. That success without trust is hollow, and betrayal carries a cost heavier than gold. Generations who never knew them still spoke their names not as businessmen, but as symbols of human choice, and in that way both men achieved a form of immortality, David through honor, Michael through caution. Their story remained eternal, whispering its lesson across time. Wealth fades, power crumbles, but character is the only legacy that endures. Decades after both men had passed, their names continued to surface in business circles. Universities taught their story alongside case studies of great corporations, not because of their financial achievements but because of the moral compass it represented. Professors stressed that profit margins and balance sheets could never measure the true strength of a company. The trust that binds people together was the real currency of success. Entrepreneurs cited David as an icon of resilience, while Michael was used as a case study in the dangers of moral collapse. Surprisingly, some modern leaders admired Michael's late humility, recognizing that his final years carried an honesty rare in those who fall from power. In this way, both men contributed lessons, one through triumph, the other through failure. The echoes of their choices shaped not just businesses, but the values of those who sought to lead responsibly. Their story became immortal, etched not in gold but in the hearts of those who sought to avoid the mistakes of the past. In the small town where David and Michael's journey began, their story became folklore. Parents told their children about the two boys who built an empire together, only for greed to tear them apart. A street was later named after David in honor of his contributions to the community. Lined with schools and clinics funded by his foundation, people passing through often stopped to ask about the man behind the name, and locals proudly shared his story. Michael, though never honored in stone, became part of the tale as well. His life was whispered as a warning, a shadow to David's light, yet over time the town softened its judgment. They remembered Michael not only for his betrayal, but for his attempts to redeem himself, however late they came. Together, their legacies stood as two sides of the same coin, forever entwined in the collective memory of the place that had once seen their rise and fall. David's descendants carried forward his teachings. His children and grandchildren did not inherit vast fortunes but instead the guiding principle of integrity. Many of them became teachers, doctors, and community leaders, proud to uphold the values their patriarch had lived by. Meanwhile, Michael left no heirs, but his story still reached young minds through those who shared it as a cautionary tale. In some ways, his absence of legacy became part of the lesson. Greed may win in the short run, but it leaves nothing for future generations. Young entrepreneurs, inspired by both men's journey, often wrote essays and books reflecting on the meaning of honor in business. The wisdom passed down through their lives transcended time. David and Michael, though gone, continued to shape choices made by people they would never meet, reminding the world that our actions echo far beyond our lifetimes. As years turned into centuries, the story of David and Michael took on symbolic weight. They were no longer seen merely as two men, but as representations of universal forces: trust and betrayal, integrity and greed, resilience and downfall. Artists painted them, writers reimagined their story, and philosophers debated the meaning of their choices. Some described David as the embodiment of balance and Michael as the disruption that proves balance's necessity. Without one, the other could not be understood. Their tale became timeless, not tied to a specific era or culture, but as an allegory for every generation. In that sense, their lives had become archetypal, woven into the human story itself. Together, they became a symbol of balance, warning and inspiration, shadow and light, forever bound. Though their story inspired countless lessons, one question lingered across generations: could Michael have been forgiven? Philosophers debated whether redemption, though sincere, can erase betrayal. Some argued David's refusal to fully reconcile showed wisdom, for trust, once broken, cannot be fully repaired. Others believed that David's final compassion suggested forgiveness was possible, even if friendship was not. This eternal question kept their story alive, ensuring it was never just a closed chapter but an open discussion about the complexity of human relationships. The debate itself was the legacy, reminding the world that choices are never simple, and forgiveness, though noble, comes with its own limits. At last, their tale settled into the annals of history, not as a business story but as a human one. David and Michael became immortal not because of wealth or fame, but because their lives told a truth older than time itself: that greed destroys and integrity heals. Statues crumble, fortunes vanish, but the moral of their journey endured, carried in stories, lectures, art, and whispered advice. Every betrayal reminded people of Michael. Every act of loyalty reminded them of David. The world did not remember them as perfect men but as flawed, real, human beings whose choices reflected the paths available to all. And so, the greedy business partner became more than a tale. It became a mirror in which each generation could see itself, warning, guiding, and reminding humanity that in the end, what remains is not what we owned, but who we chose to be.